Constraints in Syntheyes are amazing. Using constraints, we can guide our 3D points into more physically accurate positions by limiting what they are allowed to do. We can tell them to lock to planes, single axes, or align to one another. Once you've got a better understanding, you can even start chain linking them. Once you understand the scope of constraints in Syntheyes, your tracking will never be the same. Whether or not your friends and family appreciate what you will have become after this journey, I hold no liability. So for this video, we'll only be looking at ground constraints, and we'll be taking a look at other types of constraints in future videos. So here I have a shot with a few autos and some supervised trackers. I chose the shot because it has a flat area and an uneven surface. I chose a shot like this so we can demonstrate what happens when things go right and what happens when things go wrong. So let's kick things off and hit it with a solve. If you're wondering what these red rings are, these are tracker radars. The larger the ring, the more error you have in your tracker. By default, you shouldn't see this, but I have it turned on by right-clicking, View. I can't find it. Oh, there it is. Show Tracker Radar. Handy tool for when you start getting into quality check. Now let's take a look at our solve in quad view. You could hit F4 on your keyboard, or come up here and click on quad. Now if we zoom in and take a look at our ground points, you can see that they are not level to the actual plane of our grid. So there are many orders of operations when it comes to applying your constraints in Syntheyes. Some are better, some are worse, and most of the time it depends on what you're doing. So I'm going to show you a quick way how to make your ground constraints actually work, and we'll be exploring more about why they're working in future videos. Because you might end up finding that this might break depending on the shot you're doing, which will lead you to have to employ more creative methods. So just to jump right in, we're going to go ahead and highlight all of the ground points and tell them that they belong to the floor. Notice that not everything's selected in my camera viewer. I can go ahead and shift select them individually, but that's kind of annoying. There might be a way to select them all in this viewport that I'm missing, but for now we're going to switch to the 3D viewer. So if I hit F3 on my keyboard, or come up to Layout and switch to Perspective, so over here, I can lock to my camera view with this button up here, or hit L on your keyboard. The red border means I right-clicked and dragged and I'm now in Pan 2D mode. In this view, I can come down to Lasso Trackers, and then I can highlight everything that I want. And I'm going to hit F4 on my keyboard. Also, if you want to see the perspective view in your quad view, you can also hit 4 on your keyboard instead of F4. Now that they're all highlighted, I'm going to make sure that I'm in the Tracker tab, come over to the Constraints portion here, Seed and Lock, and right here where it says Unconstrained, I can click here and see that we have a lot of options. We're going to explore these in other videos, but for today we're just going to look at any XZ plane. So I'm going to apply. And now you can see we have all these little seed points magnetically snapped to the nearest plane. I should mention now, in case I don't include it in the start of the video, that I am working Y up. And to switch that, you could come over to Edit, Scene Settings, and switch it right here to whatever you want it to be. If you want it to remain permanently in your Syntheyes scenes for other projects, you're going to have to change this in the preferences. So now if I were to solve, I'm going to hit Shift G. You can see that we actually don't get any change. Now if we look through this stuff right here, you could see partway down it says Camera 1 3 times. And it's saying, please set up position, origin constraints, orientation constraints, and a scale constraint. Now, as with every solve, by default it kind of does its own thing. But once we start adding our own stuff, we're going to have to switch to constrain mode. And now we're putting our own hands on the steering wheel and we'll have to give it some of this stuff ourselves. So I'll hit OK, and I'll head over to Solver, and we're going to switch to refine mode. Let's check off constrain, and hit go. Now you can see it already did the job. Now it's solved, but you could see that we still have a laundry list of things that it wants us to give it. It's asking for the same orientation, origin, size constraint, and it's kind of doing its own thing again. So if I were to keep solving, it's going to zero down into whatever it has said under the hood, and I don't know what that is, honestly. If it's in the manual, I can't remember, if I've even read that far. It's a lot of stuff, I'm sorry. So it would be nice to anchor some stuff down and give it a scale, just so we can ditch some of this randomness that's going on. So let's go over and pick a point that we want to be the center of our scene. Let's pick something close to this human right here. So I'll grab a point maybe on top of this big concrete surface. I'm going to pick this because I intentionally picked some wrong ground points here just to show you some error later. So this point right here, if I hit F4, come over to the tracker tab and change it from floor to origin. I typically use lock point. In this case, same thing. Origin will always lock to the ground plane. Meanwhile, lock point will do the same thing. It's going to lock to the 0 point in our world, but you have the freedom to move it up and down if you choose. Origin will just kind of ignore these values, at least for the Y, I think. So for now, I'll stick with origin. And if I hit solve, you can see that our ground is snapped over here. If I hit 4 on my keyboard so we can also see this camera view, now you can see our grid plane looks a little bit more reasonable. But now we have to worry about the scale. So let's put a human in here just so we can see what things look like. I'm going to come over to 3D, head over here and grab a Earthling, and let's zoom in here and drag in an Earthling, and we'll release him when he's at, let's say, I'm going to go with 170 centimeters. And if I wanted to be exact, I can come over here and type in 170, tab, 170, tab, 170. Now this is a pretty big human. So to set a size constraint, I'm going to hit F2, and let's pick 2 trackers that we like. I'm actually going to take any one of these trackers that I can roughly guess the distance and link them together. So I'm going to grab this and alt-click over here, which creates a link. Now, I can tell it the distance between these 2 positions. So with this tracker selected, I can head back to the tracker room, and here we have distance, which is now adjustable. I'm going to pretend this is half of a human worth of length. So let's pretend 100 centimeters roughly. I'll type in 100. By the way, the units are whatever you want them to be. You can pretend this is miles, kilometers, inches, and centimeters. Once you go to export your files, that's where you tell it what kind of units you've been working with. So if I hit solve, it looks like I got a pretty good guess. And you could see if I drag this distance up to 130, hit solve, we have now shrunken our little man. So I'll Control Z, undo back to 100, and hit F3 so we can take a look at what's going on. Now we have our solve and we have our scale. We'll worry about orientation in later videos. Now there's something scary going on in this video. I highlighted all my ground points in the foreground and told them that they belong to the floor when only half of them do. Over here on this concrete, I think it's concrete, I don't know. Over here on this big concrete slab, I suspect that the points are going to be pretty flat. I specifically trust stuff that's on the water level. It could be warped and distorted due to weather, but I like the footage. So I ended up highlighting all these points on the left on this likely very uneven dirt. If I were to take a look at these points, select them and zoom in, you could see that we actually have a fair amount of error on these points. That's because Syntheyes is trying to force perfectly flat constraints where perfect flat doesn't exist. Our error up at the top here is 1.8, so on average around our scene we have close to 2 pixels worth of slide. Not very good. So what I'm going to do is remove the constraints from these points over in the dirt. And to do that, I'm going to hit F3, make sure Lasso Trackers is on, and highlight everything that I don't trust. With those selected, I can come over to Trackers, come over to the constraints, and change to Unconstrained. And now I can hit Solve, Shift G, and you can see that our scene has kind of changed its level, and our error should have dropped as well, and it did from 1.8 to 1.1. That's a pretty big change. If I take a look over here, you see that our trackers have kind of, especially this right here, you can see the difference in this. I saw a couple points that weren't as great. Things are generally improving. I saw one over here jump quite a distance. Where is that? It didn't get as good as you would have expected it to. Okay, I can't find it and I'm too lazy to. Oh, right here maybe. Nope, that got better. Okay, I don't know where it is. And now, if we looked over at the points over here, these points should have improved as well, but I'm also selecting some points that are likely, possibly, half an inch up higher than the others. The points over here on the water, or the edge of the water, could be lower than the points up here on this little bit of mud, but we're still getting a pretty decent result. So hitting play over here, see what we have. And if you wanted to check the error radars, you can right click, View, Show Tracker Radar. So something we could have done a lot sooner is we should have applied distortion. When you're solving, distortion is going to greatly determine where your points are, and depending on your workflow, you're going to want both of them dynamically helping each other out. And I say depending on the workflow because sometimes saving the distortion after the calculation could be beneficial. I'll admit, I think that's kind of rare, but it certainly is the case sometimes. You don't want to overload the parameters at times. So I'm going to turn on distortion, and over here I'm going to hit more, and you could stick with classic. I don't want to. I want the new stuff. I like the new stuff. I do want to make a video about distortion one day, but today is not that day. I'm going to switch to radial fourth order, and I'm going to add C2 and C4. If I hit F3, I'll just show you what these are doing. We got that, and we got this. Typically, you should probably only start with one and see if you need the other. You know what? That's what I'm going to do. Solve, and yeah, so it looks pretty good. And a shot like this with my camera, I probably don't need this, but I can switch to calculate and see if this makes much of a difference. And I don't know if that made much of a difference or if it just failed, because it looks a little bit funky. And it kind of blew up in the middle a little bit. I'm actually just going to flip that to manual and stick with C2. So this first video is pretty much done, but just as a bonus, I'm going to hit this with a smooth. And I have a video on this, so I'm just going to gloss through this very fast. But I'm going to go to filter control, and I'm going to use frequency at 12, just because I like that for handheld shots. Flip on XYZ so that we smooth the path. Hit apply, reset so that this doesn't apply to every solve. Come over to axis locks, turn on position locks, and we need the smooth path to be loaded into the seed path right here. So I'll hit get. Now we have our data, and it animates across every frame, and make sure you do this on your first frame, usually, because this will animate on and off. Hit go, and our solution has adjusted slightly, and we can see the points are moving. And that would be our finished video on ground points. That ended a little awkwardly. You know what? Half this tutorial was a little bit awkward. So you get what you get. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. And yeah, happy tracking. Did I ever say happy tracking? I need a slogan. I need a cool slogan. Something like stay on track. That's lame. Man, should I cut this out? I should probably cut this out.